Welcome to Sex Therapist Shoot the Shit, brought to you by the University of Pleasure. I am Dr. Tera Jansen, licensed psychologist and certified sex therapist.
And I'm Laura Rademacher, licensed marriage and family therapist and certified sex therapist. Hey, Tara.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, and I am so excited for the
very excited.
fabulous guest that we have today.
She's a repeat guest, but we had to have her back on
That's right.
since we moved to video. We had to do it.
That's right.
Because she's very expressive in a way that makes me very happy. So, should we get to it?
Are we ready?
We're ready.
We should probably do some music.
Yeah, let's do some music. We're back. Katie Spencer's here.
Yeah!
Katie.
The Dr. Katie Spencer.
I like the intro because like while my camera's off, it's like listening to you too. Like it's like I just heard you all talking about me and you're gonna say things about me. Like, nice things about me. It's so nice.
It's like a little voyeuristic in like its own way. I like Katie, we usually let people introduce themselves just so we get it all right. Do you mind introducing yourself to the audience?
Yeah. My name is Katie Spencer. I use she, her pronouns. I am a faculty member at the Eli Coleman Institute for Sexual and Gender Health at the University of Minnesota Medical School, part of the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health.
You got all of that. Good job.
That was pretty impressive.
Thank you. Thank you. I am the clinical training director here, and I'm the outgoing medical director for M Health Fairview's comprehensive gender care program, which is like the integration of the medical and behavioral health aspects of our gender affirming care. What else? I'm a licensed psychologist and I'm a certified sex therapist, and
you're fancy. Katie's fancy.
But I would say like most of my work has been in queer and trans like sexual health and sex therapy and sexual pleasure, and that's my passion. Is that helpful?
That is helpful.
Yeah. And
you also, I know we warned you, right? So every time we have a guest on, we make them do their origin story. Do you feel willing to do your origin story? How you got into the field of sex and sexual health?
Right. So it's my origin story about how I got interested in sex therapy.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could technically do any origin story. Like if you wanted to do like just, you know.
I was born on a dark and stormy night.
Anything of interest, like, you know, that really just interests you. But technically, yes, usually people will talk about how they found their way into sex therapy.
Yeah.
Because we're a big band of weirdos, us that end up in.
It's true. Okay, well,
yeah.
So the things that I feel like I usually highlight whenever someone asks me that is a couple things. One, so I'm a Gen Xer. I was born in 1977. I just feel like that's an important part of my origin story. And I grew up in Missouri and in the Midwest, and I don't remember receiving a lot of good sex education. And the things that I kind of learned about sex, I mean, you know, this is all pre-internet, like in my childhood and adolescence. Like, so I didn't have like really, I feel like people who are just a few years younger than me, like had access to like chat rooms or like other things like that. And like got a lot of sexual information that way. But I feel like most of mine came from Danielle Steele romance novels that I
read. Me too. Did you steal them from from a parent? Like that's how, or the library?
No. So I was always at the public library. Thank you, public library.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And then I found, I should ask my brothers about this, but I remember when I was younger than that, probably like 10, like maybe like 9 or 10, we found like, cause we would like we lived in kind of a rural area. And like, so we'd like run around and be like outside. I found this book called The Pearl. I should really try to find this book, but I remember very clearly it was like a paperback and it had like erotica in it. And I remember my brothers and I sort of like, everyone sort of like shamefully, secretly reading it on their own and then like kind of leaving it for the next person to read.
Wait, did you say you found this outside?
Yeah, outside.
You support
Well,
my theory that back in that time, porn just lived in the woods. You would
It
just go
does.
outside and find some magazines stashed in the hole of a tree, or, I mean, this stuff happens so often.
yeah, I mean, I think it was like other neighborhood kids like had been, you know, and so like had probably placed it there, whatever. Anyway, but I just remember the Pearl. And I remember MTV. I watched MTV a lot. Like that's where I got a lot of like notions and ideas about sexuality, like peak 90s MTV music videos, like late 90s. Anyway, whatever. I don't think I understood that I could be. I don't think I even knew like what a sex therapist was, but I when I went to college at first I wrote experimental poetry and was a creative writing major.
Oh,
Feels
heck
not,
yes.
this feels
Yeah.
not, I know Katie well. This feels not surprising to me.
I loved it. Yeah. I don't know if any of those pieces still exist, but but then I was like, then I became a like really radical militant vegan, and so then I wanted to be a nutritionist. But then those classes were really hard and boring. And I was like, I gotta get this together. And so I was like, well, I'm really good at talking to people, so I'll go in. And I was fascinated by psychology, so I like went into psychology. And I feel like I've told this before. They had like a panel of graduate students. There was a counseling psychologist on there, and they were like, this is the social justice psychology. And I was like, that's for me, because I had also become politicized during that time, and I was a feminist. And I took my first women's health class, and that also very much like politicized me and radicalized me around like women's sexual health and women's sexuality. I came out as queer in college and started having lesbian sex, and that really radicalized me. Um, but also a lot of that stuff in like the late 90s, probably, you know, there was like a very, at the time it was referred to as third wave feminism, but like very like sexual empowerment. And I think coming out as queer and really being immersed in sort of like some of those spaces and like being nurtured and mentored by like older queer women and like, you know, who were like, masturbate, have lots of sex. Like there was like also a lot of pro sex feminist, queer feminist stuff about like fisting and like have crazy like kinky sex, you know. So like I was like 21 and I was like, wow. um yeah, that was all very fun. So then I think when I went to graduate school in counseling psych, I was very passionate about working on LGBT health in general. And then I think that emerged into like sexual health, and I wanted to work um, in gender affirming care. This is like the early 2000s. So this is like we were trying to depathologize and like all these kinds of different movements about access to gender affirming care before there was even that term. And where I work now was one of the only places where you could do a postdoctoral fellowship in human sexuality, and there was a transgender health program. And so when I was like a second year PhD student, I like wrote my former boss about how do I get a job there. So that's how I ended up here. But then when I did my postdoc, I got kind of exposed to general relationship and sex therapy and like compulsive sexual behavior and like all this other different kinds of work. And it was just like a deep dive into all of that. And I just became really passionate about sex therapy as well as gender affirming care. And like the intersection of it is like kind of what I do now. But yeah, I would say the seeds of it have always been like just as like a feminist and a queer person, like wanting to work on like pleasure and thriving and well-being of my communities. That's how I became a sex therapist. And sex therapists are so fun. It's like it's never boring. I just
It's
never
true.
tire of talking about sex and gender. I could literally talk about it all day.
Yeah. It's Katie, for relevance, is a wonderful supervisor, a former supervisor of mine, because I did my fellowship where Katie is at. So, and I feel like if you would have watched a supervision session between Katie and I, it was like two lightning bolts in a room.
I can imagine that. Yes. Yes.
High voltage, high energy.
It was very high voltage. I think other people would get exhausted watching us.
Or energized or pay to see it.
Yeah.
I was gonna
Good
say
call.
I always feel energized when
Mhm.
when I'm around the two of you, and then I leave. I'm like, oh, okay, I got my little. I don't know. I don't drink energy drinks. I just hang out with you two.
You can tell
Um,
that.
do you mind if we circle back to found pornography and found like I do feel like these are like this makes me sound very dated and old, but like to me, like the public library, when you talked about the public library, like when I was a youth, right, like pre-internet, like you used to like I used to just get dropped off at the library, and like the library, because it was considered like a safe place, like I was just like left to my own devices to just like read anything that I wanted to read. And I might be there for hours just like creeping through books. And I learned so much, which is so interesting because I don't think that that's how youth like learn about sex, like those kind of like traded books or books that are like handed down, or like, you know, like, oh, find this book in the library. And this, like, you know, like I remember in my library, even in high school, there was a little corner where there were some books that like be like, oh, go over there and there's some books that you'll learn some things. And I feel like with the internet that's changed so much. And I don't know necessarily in a way that makes me sad, but like it's definitely like notable. Like,
I don't know, from talking with, I don't mean to be like talking with young people, but like over the last like 10 or 15 years and working with like queer and trans, like teens and young adults, I feel like there's like Tumblr was a version of
mm,
that. Or like
mm-hmm.
sometimes there's like online spaces that are the version. Although I think there's like a part about the public library that is, I guess maybe it is a singular, it's like you're kind of it is a little more alone. Like think about like you're looking through those books and you're reading those books, and usually you're not with someone, or you're sort of, so you're like kind of doing that processing on your own, even though I guess if you're on the computer maybe you're by yourself, but you're interacting with people maybe a little bit more. I don't know, that I just, it's off the top of my head, but yes, that's, I mean, in college, I used to go visit like that section in our main library all the time and just look at all the like queer history books, or just like pull, like I could spend hours doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I love the idea too that like some of that is maybe inspiration or like identity work, you know, like when you're looking through all this like queer history stuff and you're going, okay, you know, how do I factor into this? Where do I fit into all of this? It was maybe not always like the best, most thorough sex ed. Like I can think of some that like, I think one of the first things I found was like a very detailed story about mermaid sex, which ended up not being super
Mm-hmm.
relevant to my life, but was really fascinating at the time. You know, I mean, so there's a part of me that misses the times when you'd just find a random book in the library or magazines stashed in trees in the woods behind your subdivision, because
Yeah.
I've heard that a lot.
I feel like I got a lot of like basic sex education from Judy Blume as well. If I'm
Yes.
being entirely honest with you, like, because Judy Blume also had like that adult book, Wifey, which we've talked about on the other podcast. Have you ever read Wifey by Judy Blume?
No,
I
no.
didn't read a lot of Judy Blume. I'm like, wow, I read Sweet Valley High, I read Nancy Drew, and then I went
Mm-hmm.
straight to the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Oh my God, do you know what I found the other night? For people of a certain age and generation, I found all the episodes of Real Sex from HBO.
Oh
Somewhere on
yeah,
the
that was
internet.
such a good
No.
show.
And I
Like,
remember watching Real Sex because it started in like the early 90s and went through, and there was some period that we had like HBO, and I remember like just being like completely like titillated
mm-hmm.
by that. And like that was crazy. There's like, they went to Betty Dodson's masturbation workshop.
Wow.
They had like early pony play people. Like I was just like, wow, it was like really cool.
Yeah, it was like a docu-series, right? Before like people were
It
really
was like a
even.
cheeky docu-series. Yeah, if you look at like the Eddie, and then they would have like kind of person on the street interviews. So then you had
Mm-hmm.
people in New York City like talking about sex. It's like very interesting.
I
Yeah,
have never seen this.
Real Sex
Oh,
is
you should
great.
I
have
did not have cable at the time, and I should have gone
Oh,
back
I
at
mean,
some point, but
no, we'll have a watch party.
yeah,
yes.
I don't think I saw it until I was like well into my 20s. I don't think I saw like, because it was ran, I think, for a long time. I think it was a really popular
Yeah,
series.
it
Or
was
maybe I'm
on for
making
like
that up.
9 years or something,
Yeah.
from 92 to the early 2000s.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you
Wow.
know, when I say that I learned most things from Judy Blume, it was like at least I learned about like bodies and like menstruation and
Periods.
like things like that.
Yep.
But then Judy Blume also had some like racier adult stuff, right? Where I was like, I like Judy Blume, and then I was like, oh, this is some different. But I read a lot of Nora Roberts. Nora Roberts was another. Thank you, Nora Roberts. That was another one that I would pilfer from the public library. But yeah, anyway, I just wanted to like, I was like, man, I don't know that that's as done. I mean, because people go to internet, right? Like they go on the internet now. Like at least I feel like a lot of the like young adults and like teens that I've worked with, like it's typically online. But I do feel like in middle school there was a magazine. I remember that it was more the boys, right? But like that would be all like traded. Do you know what I mean? Like someone
Yes,
got
yeah.
their hands on something in somebody's basement. I remember somebody found a briefcase of pornography in a car trunk.
Yeah, no, I remember going over to Matt Stack's house and a bunch of people were over and he had a VHS of Edward Penis Hands. And then it was like
That's so funny. As you were saying that, I was literally thinking about how someone in school had a VHS of something called Foreskin Gump. Was another.
The
Yeah.
cheesiness of mainstream porn in I was going to say in the 90s, but even the 70s, there was a certain level of humor. In the 70s, there were like whole, I know there was this big Alice in Wonderland one, like big production, like costumes, I mean, it just seemed, there was a whole storytelling thing that was happening there.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you think that I was like literally as you're talking, I'm like, I wonder why that was. Like, was it like kind of a spoonful of sugar to make medicine go down? Like, I mean, was it like a way to be like, oh, if it was funny, then it made it less problematic somehow? Or
I
like,
have
do
a
you know what I
friend
mean?
who was a actress in about that period, and she told me that there was a period of time where mainstream actors, actresses, whatever you want to call them, really thought that everybody was going to do porn. Like that was just a part of like you had to be comfortable with your sexuality, and that like porn and mainstream films or plays were going to kind of like merge, and there wasn't going to be this strict line between them. So she told me like, oh yeah, for a while there, your acting coaches were just saying like, well, everybody's got to be ready to do whatever. And I wonder if that was part of the big production value in the costumes is like a blurring of like, is this a movie? Is this a porn movie? Is there a difference? And then there was eventually a big difference because I think some obscenity laws happened around. I mean, that was not the first time that obscenity laws happened, but I feel like there was kind of like a crackdown around that time that kind of changed the shape of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a film historian. I'm just
I mean, you know a lot more
talking
than
about
I
it
do.
every once in a while.
By the way, like I felt like and this is just my opinion, it doesn't mean that it is correct one, but I felt like when 50 Shades of Grey and that whole thing, like that movie was like the perfect opportunity to like kind of create a new genre of merging, right? Where you have like real storytelling with like, real sex. And then they did not do that. 50 Shades of Grey, which ended up being, in my opinion, not. I've seen Lifetime movies that I think are far sexier.
You didn't think 50 Shades of Grey was a cinematic masterpiece for the ages, Tara?
No, in my opinion, left a lot to be desired. But anyhow, we by the way, before we began today, Katie, we're admiring your sticker behind you. What does it say? I
Both of
masturbate.
them. They're great.
Yeah.
can't do it. But yeah. The I masturbate.
You told us that it's a bit of a relic, actually, right? It's an old sticker.
Yeah, no, so the amazing Bean Robinson, who is the head of our relationship and sex therapy program here for a long time and is an amazing sex therapist. She had this in her office for a very long time. It said I masturbate, and I used to always see it. So like when she was retiring and cleaning out her office, like I inherited it. So it's very special to me. But I love it. I also love masturbation. I think masturbation is like one of the foundational things within sex therapy and like in our sexual relationship with ourselves. So I love to talk about masturbation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that sticker starts conversations with clients?
Well, so usually my clients sit here so they're not facing it, but I'm sure you see it when you come in. There's a lot to look at in here when
your office. I've been in Katie's office. You've got a lot of like
I'm facing a vulva pillow. There's like vulva drawings behind me. There's a dildo and a set of not vibrators, dilators. There's like crocheted genitals. There's condoms and lube, and like there's paintings of Hitachi magic wands. So there's a lot to look at. But yes,
Yeah.
I mean, people do ask questions about any of those sort of objects too.
Does anyone ever sit down and go, this is exactly what I thought a sex therapist's office would look like?
Yeah, I get that, but also I don't know if you all get this, like sometimes it can be overwhelming, you
Yeah.
know. So I definitely think you know, and actually I'm when you sit here, you also sit across from my bookcase. So that this is like kind of some of my older books, and there's like a mix of like psychology, like testing and assessment, and like theories of change and like that kind of stuff. But I'm facing kind of all my self-help sex therapy books. So like it's like healing painful sex, like, you know, like just
Yeah.
sex, like da, 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 like naked at our age, you know. I'm just reading titles off of it. So, you know, you're in a sex therapist's office, like people get that. But I don't know if there's pros and cons to that. I feel like it's been rare that I've had someone come in and be like, it's too much, but it can sort of like prompt the conversation of what it feels like, especially if someone's feeling nervous coming in. And I feel like I try to transform that into like, this is a really good place to like practice like talking about sex and sexuality. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and you can tell me, because some of the questions that I'm asking you, someone might not have ever asked you before, because sometimes we don't talk about sex in our culture and in different cultures. So like I try to like normalize it and then use it as an invitation to like ask questions and practice that like verbal communication that's just so important in like sexuality and sexual health, you know?
Yeah, I feel like I've had people say to me, they're like, you and your office are exactly what I thought a sex therapist would be. And I'm always like, I don't always like know how to totally interpret that. Like,
I think especially if I'm wearing like some sort of like printed flowy outfit.
mhm,
Oh yeah, there's certain outfits I put on in the morning and I'm like, I am doing my therapist drag today. Holy moly, do I look like a therapist? And
mhm,
in some ways that's like comforting, because I'm just like, there's almost this feeling of like, all right, I've put on the uniform, I'm going to work, right? And then there's some times where I'm like, do I want to change this up a little bit? Like, obviously, therapists can look all kinds of different ways. I'm not thinking that I have to look this way, but I don't know. I actually think about that one a lot, and I have not come to any conclusions about it. I just have those thoughts when I put on my clothes in the morning.
yeah. What's really funny for me is a lot of times, and I don't know if you all struggle with this at all, because like obviously, like, you know, Katie, you're a psychologist, I'm a psychologist, Laura, you're a marriage and family therapist, right? Like a lot of times people will often be like if you do sex therapy, you're a sex therapist, and then they sort of like with me, they'll be like, well, can you talk about depression, or can you talk about, and I'm like, yeah, I'm a psychologist, right? Like it's
Right.
interesting. Sex therapy has a way of like sort of overshadowing like the rest of, I don't know if you all experience that all, but I feel like that
Yeah.
happens like really consistently for me.
Well, I feel like people come in to see me for different things. And so I feel like some of my gender clients who came to me for like care as they move through like a medical transition, or specifically came to me for, but now I have people who specifically come to me for like gender affirming sex therapy, like trans knowledgeable sex therapy. But like, so I've definitely had clients who have seen me for a long time and they're like, wait, can I talk to you about sex? And I'm like, yes. It's a twofer. Both and. Yeah.
I've occasionally had clients apologize to me where they'll be like, I didn't talk about sex today. I'm sorry. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
that's
oh my
happened to me
gosh, it's not
so many times.
mandatory, right? Like we talk about your whole life. Whatever you want to bring to therapy is what you bring. And yeah, just like you said, anyone who's a sex therapist has had training just to be a therapist too, and talk about life.
Well, I mean, this is maybe niche content, but I'd be curious about a range of
This
people.
this
This whole
podcast is literally
podcast,
only niche content.
it's the
But I mean,
biggest
something,
niche.
and I don't know, Tara, if you've noticed this, but I definitely noticed this talking to my friends who are in private practice, and definitely people who worked at the Institute and who are now in private practice. Like, I think it's the nature of like paying for therapy in private practice versus sort of like how sometimes people access our services here. It's like kind of a broader net. So I feel like people are like more targeted. So like sometimes people are coming in for like a sex therapy thing, but there can be like a broader sense, like, you know, we might end up, or like people come here because it's like the trans like healthcare center, but they just want someone who's not going to make it all about them being trans, but they're really talking about all this other stuff. Whereas I feel like sometimes you all get like a lot of clients. So tell me if this is true. This is just clients who are like, I need to talk about low desire, or I need to talk about organ. Like they just think they want to talk about one thing, but then it's always related to lots of other stuff, right? Is that true? No?
Yeah. Yeah, I think people come to me and often have a pretty targeted goal, and are like zoning in on that. And then oftentimes after a few sessions, something in life will come up and they'll show up and be like, I saw my family this weekend and I want to talk about it. Or, I'm going through some grief because of something right now. Or, I got an email from someone I went to grade school with and it's brought up all this stuff for me. Is that okay? And so oftentimes you're right, we do end up like going to all these different places. Or if someone comes in for low desire and it's like, well, actually that's kind of complex and it might touch on like several different areas of your life. So we need to talk about those now. But I think it does surprise people sometimes when they've just come in thinking, I am going to do some sex therapy, and then it expands.
Yeah, I think to the point where like when I do like consult calls with folks, if they like are interested in doing therapy with me, like I usually in a consult call will say like, at times people use me just for specialty work, like I just like sexual health or maybe gender sort of specific focuses, but also some people use me as a one-stop shop because I'm a psychologist, right? And like I've certainly trained in general mental health and general couples therapy. And so like that's like actually a part of like when I like set up a point, just because sometimes people like literally, because I want them to know like you can do both or you can do just, because some people have existing therapists and so they literally just want to see like me as a specialist, which is totally, I know some people like I'm fine either way, but like you certainly could do holistic care like if you want to. And to both of the points you're making, like obviously it's so challenging to, one of the things I always talk about with folks, and I'm sure you all similarly as well, is right, like sex happens in context, right? And so like it's hard to really ever truly separate it like from the context that it's occurring in. So, like I feel like more often than not things expand into other topics. But yeah, people apologize to me all the time too. Like all the time for talking about things that aren't sex.
Maybe this would be a good place to take our quick little break that we need to take.
Yeah. And then we're going to come back and talk more about masturbation, I think. Yeah. We're back. I never know how to announce. like,
that's the tried and true way, right? You sound like a news anchor. It's perfect.
I know. And we're back.
And we're back. That's a break. You should have a dramatic break, like a cliffhanger.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Like usually top 3 reasons you need to masturbate, and heading to a break.
Come back when we teach you the secret to the best masturbation of your life.
Yeah, the best orgasm you'll ever have.
Done.
Wow, but then we have to do it.
Yeah.
Well, like, I've never promised that to someone.
Yeah, I'm like the opposite of. Right. I'm the opposite of overpromising. I'm like a chronic underseller. I'm like, this might work. Give it a try. Like, I never.
Interesting. Okay, speaking of masturbation, and wow, I have so many opinions. But in our staff meeting last week, we were working on like a worksheet that's basically like the feelings worksheet, but around sensation words. Because I'm sure you all have to do this all the time too. It's like, I mean, developing sort of like a sensation vocabulary can be challenging, and so especially like for people with like vulvas and like maybe sort of in dominant US culture, like we haven't really been taught a lot about our vulvas or about our clitorises, and like sort of, maybe people haven't been encouraged to explore them and masturbate or not. And so if you're like first touching something, you're like, what does that actually feel like? And then having the language. So like being able to make that kind of language to like body connection. So anyway, we were trying to come up with all these words and it was just so fun.
I'm sure it was. That sounds like a blast.
What are the sensation terms? So I'm curious if you all have some, but I just feel like that's such a core thing, like when people are exploring masturbation too, and maybe exploring like sex toys for the first time, because you have such different range of sensation using, like, I just keep being like, using your hands, being analog or digital,
Yeah. But this brings us to like when we were talking about maybe things to talk about today, one of the things that I think I have brought up is like, how do you two kind of, I guess, talk to people about like how to like navigate masturbation, especially if they haven't done much. You know what I mean? Like sort of like the starter kit for the person that maybe hasn't masturbated much, right? Or has maybe had a complicated relationship.
You love a kit. The last time I was here,
I do love a
I have
kit.
no idea
We
how we
talked about kits.
Wait, you wanted to start a foot
Yeah.
fetishist kit.
Yeah.
I meant more like theoretically. I think a foot fetish kit, I like literally wanted to make a kit. Like, concrete.
I mean, a masturbation starter kit, actually, a masturbation subscription service would do great. This is not a capitalistic podcast, but I think we come up with a lot of business ideas.
It's true. It's true.
Or maybe you are, maybe you identify as a capitalistic podcast.
We haven't
I feel
decided
like
yet.
somehow our capitalistic tendencies come out when you're on, Katie, which is so antithetical to the way that I think of you. It's so funny that that's what happens. I mean, maybe we just have great ideas together.
Well, you know what? In like post society, when we all have like all the resources that we need, you would just make those things for people's pleasure and enjoyment, not for money, but just because that's what people in the community need.
That sounds lovely.
That's
Well,
what
That sounds lovely.
we were talking about how there should be like little ice cream trucks like at all the different lakes around town, you know, like, and like if everybody just had the resources that they need, like someone would take that on as their project because they love making ice cream and they love working at the little shop, you know. I would love to make a masturbation starter kit.
Yeah.
And
well,
share.
what do you, I know I have some thoughts on this, but what do you imagine being in that? What would you put in the first 1 or 2 masturbation starter kits that you would send out?
Oh God, I really wish I was a prop comic and I had a mirror and I could hold it up. You like open the box and then there's a mirror.
Because you want to see yourself. You want to see your vulva.
Yeah, but I do think, I mean, this is something like if I was working with a trainee, I would talk about like how you approach that with people because people are at very different places in readiness and like what comes up for them in the thought about that. But I do think having like a visual image like of your genitals like in your mind also can like help increase that mind body connection. So maybe that's like advanced. Maybe that's not in the very first shipment in the first month. But maybe in the first month you just have an anatomy drawing.
I find, don't get me wrong, like I think that there is a lot of usefulness in getting people to like look at themselves, but I find more resistance to that than a lot of other things. And I think part of it is maybe just like good old fashioned like anxiety and like, you know, just uncomfortable. But I also, there's a lot of like, I think cynicism around that because it's like such a this kind of like marketed thing that of course a sex therapist would have you look like. I don't know about you all, but I've literally had people come in and be like, what are you going to do? Like make me look at my genitals with a hand mirror? Have you two ever gotten like pushback on that? Like, I feel like I've had people be kind of cynical. The best word, it's maybe not cynical, but kind of like some resistance to that idea because I think it feels like too on the nose for like sex therapy.
I think sometimes I'll make a joke. I mean, again, this is like, I mean, for sex therapists, I mean, this is part of your skill set is being able to read your audience, you know, and like, I'm always telling trainees this, like, you know, I have all these books on my shelf. Some of these books are great for people and some of them are way too much. And you have to, that's part of your skill is like kind of assessing like what's going to meet that person where they're at. But so if I think someone is like, gonna think that that's like whatever, I'll be like, yeah, maybe it's a little eye rolling, but then I'll kind of explain like maybe the science behind it or like I'll use my best sort of like, you know, this is why I think it would be helpful, and then I'll try to invite them in and like collaborate on it. But if someone's being like really cynical, I'll either try to join with them and like make a joke or and like try to bring them around or use a sort of earnestness around that, because I actually think that having a sense of earnestness and like kind of genuineness is also helpful with the masturbation process and like having a relationship to your genitals. Cause like being sarcastic about your genitals is it gonna help you like, get in there, you know? Like sure, it's on the nose, but you know what? You're like foremothers do something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't say that.
No, I think sometimes if it's not cynicism, I think it just there's something about it. I think for some people that feels like extra vulnerable, where they're sort of like, I just feel like I should already kind of know that. And there's something about that just feels a little like, but it is like, feels a little like, I don't know, wobbly for some people, like gives them weird feelings. But I was just curious about that because it's interesting. Like I can like I've noticed that there's a lot of things that I can be like, and I agree with you 100% around like meeting people where they're at and kind of like being able to read the room and what you suggest, but like, and kind of maybe what they might be open to and might not. But of a lot of the things that I might suggest for people, that is one of the ones that I get the most pushback on, is like, which is just interesting. I was curious.
I think it can be so empowering and educational and wonderful to look at yourself with a mirror. And I also think that for some of the people that I've worked with that have felt really like just the idea, like if I start with the idea of like, if I'm going to tell you that like masturbation might be really helpful for you, how do you feel about that? And if somebody's already having like a lot of anxiety, or they're like, I've never tried it, or I tried it, I had some bad experiences, or whatever, I feel like one of the things to watch out for with a mirror is it can introduce some do I fit the body standards, right? Like when you're looking at yourself and you're going, what are my labia like? And are they supposed to be like that, right? Because they're not supposed to be like anything. Your genitals are wonderful, no matter what they are. But I think they're like you brought up, so Katie, you brought up Betty Dodson's classes earlier. And I think that at Betty's, the idea of Betty's classes, where she had a bunch of people come in and have like a masturbation circle, right? Which I think would be really intimidating for a lot of people. But I think one of the beautiful things that could happen is when you're in a room full of bodies, you often realize like bodies all look different. And these ideas we have in our heads from, I don't know, looking at models or whatever imagery we're provided in the world, that's not the same as sitting in the room with a whole bunch of people and realizing bodies look all kinds of different ways. And I feel like I wish there was a way to like magically get people the community support around looking at their genitals with a mirror, but maybe in a way that is more accessible than being in a room with a bunch of other people, because I know that a lot of people just won't do that.
I mean, I've never done that, but I would do it. But I'm like, I mean, I have had a lot of experience.
Yeah, it would be really, there would be a lot.
Well,
Yeah.
no, I remember, I mean, like, yeah, no, all of it is like so intense, but what was I gonna say? I mean, I really think maybe that's why I went back to the drawing, because I think that's another like assessment point where you're like, okay, well, maybe showing someone a drawing or showing someone like the vulva gallery like online and like
Yeah.
showing like, you know, and like I'll be kind of like, because, you know, people have so many feelings about having like longer inner labia, or like their clitoris is like more or less hooded, or like do they even know like where their clitoris and like inner and outer labia are, and where like the vaginal opening and where the introitus is, like all of that kind of stuff. Like and not that you need to do all of that, because maybe just going in blind and like being like, what does it feel like? That's another approach. Like if you touch yourself or if you use a vibrator, again, it's like, it's kind of like, not harm reduction, it's like meeting someone where they're at. Like if someone's like, I've been like pressing my legs together and like, you know, watching porn for 2 minutes, and then I like have something that kind of feels like an orgasm, and you're trying to move them to like touching their clitoris like with their bare hand, like you're not like, you know, you might suggest something else, you know, like to kind of like get them to that point. But what you were talking about reminded me of like, this was just I have a book that's out of print, but it's really lovely. It's like a book of just pictures of just vulvas. And then like people have written like stories about how they feel about their vulvas. So there's like, you know, long lips, short lips, like all sorts of different kinds of like, you know, full vulvas, like thinner vulvas, like all over the place. There's also vulvas. There's like two women who have had gender affirming surgery, you know, so like neo vaginas and like vulvas. And so anyway, but I was in my like trans teen group, and like some of the trans girls were talking about that they expected their vulvas like after surgery to be perfectly symmetrical, because they had just seen porn or just seen, you know, like whatever they had seen on Tumblr, because today's day and age was just like perfectly like, you know, just what like not very many people's vulvas look like. So showing them those pictures was so liberatory, because it was just like, people don't know that there's just such a wide range. So I think that like relationship to the body and like normalizing our genitals, especially for people who have vulvas, because we live in misogyny and patriarchy. Like, we're taught to hate it or think it's weird or gross. And it's just like, so it's in the water that we don't even know how we hold that in our body. So I just think that's like such a powerful intervention and it comes up like just if you're trying to like teach someone, even if you didn't look or anything, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I will say I've had more luck than with a hand mirror just getting someone to take a picture with their phone.
Ah, that's so hard.
Okay, so
which is interesting.
Story time. I sometimes take pictures with my phone, especially if I'm like, what's happening? Like something's happening, or like, do I have an ingrown hair, or like what's, and what?
You can zoom in. Like if you take a picture,
Yes,
you can be like, what is that bump?
that is really helpful.
You can't really see it.
Totally. And I also had this thought the other day of like, wait, where are all my photos going to the cloud? Like where?
Yeah. You got to be thoughtful about security.
Which I'm not always the most knowledgeable about. So I kind of had this moment of like, okay, where? So anyway, just a thought. I love that enlargement feature. That helps a lot. But
know where that's going. That is something usually I tell.
Do you have a family account?
Yeah.
Where
I'll always tell people, I'm like, if you do a picture, make sure that you feel comfortable or delete it immediately, but make sure, if it's saving to the cloud and you're not comfortable with it.
You have to delete it from the cloud, right?
Yeah. I'll tell people to like make sure you understand your security set, like kind of use at your own risk, right? Like if you're going to do that. But I do think to your point, right? Like part of that is like I can remember a conversation I had not that long ago about somebody that's like, I don't think I have a clitoris. And I was like, but really what it sounded like after we talked more was like that there was just a very prominent clitoral hood. Right. And like, so by pulling up diagrams and having, like looking at things like that, like, I think sometimes you can learn a lot just by starting to have to your point, like specific conversations and that stuff, like we're talking about, like it intersects so much with masturbation because people are like, oh, like, especially if it's conversations about like, the clitoris. I think a lot of people are like, it doesn't, like, I don't have one, or I'm not finding it, or it's buried.
I'm not sensate to it. I mean, that's the next section is like, like becoming mindful and aware of sensation, because that's like another part of it. But I think what you're saying, I mean, it's interesting whether it's a mirror or a diagram or a picture or like whatever. Like, I feel like that sex education component is like foundational then to sort of the like mind body connection and the emotional component relationship to it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved that when you started talking about making a list of the sensation words, because I just thought, how connective will that be for so many people? Or, you felt a sensation and then you can put a word to it. And then you can kind of think about what kinds of stimulation bring up that feeling for me, bring up this word for me. Like there's just so many. I don't know. I'm not a brain scientist clearly, but it feels like there's so many pathways in the brain that are getting made there that can be so important. And so many people don't have any words, have not let themselves put any words to any of that. So that's exciting.
Oh, one of the things too that like, as you two are talking, and I think I had mentioned it when we were talking about this as a topic, was like, I too think that like sometimes people really feel like there is like a right way to masturbate, right? Like, so for instance, I've had plenty of clients that are like, if I'm going to masturbate, I must have a vibrator. And then I might be like, and they might go out and buy like the Hitachi wand, like the one you plug into the wall, like the strongest. And then they're like, vibration doesn't work for me, right? It was too, you know what I mean? And you're like, oh, okay. Like there are so many different ways. And so I was curious, like I tend to encourage people to go, to use your term, Katie, analog. Like I tend to encourage people just to develop more of that like sensation, sort of focus, like, and I would say this for people with vulvas, penises, right? Like just in general, I generally think that works well. I don't know if people learn their bodies, but I'm curious what the two of you do with folks.
Well, I think so. As a former sex toy salesperson, I have had a lot of conversations with people about this. And I think one of the most frequent things that I've heard is someone buys a toy and they expect to just stick it on their genitals or stick their genitals in it, and the toy is going to do the rest magically. And I think that I mean, every once in a while, someone has an experience that is like that. But most of the time, just like everything, it is not magic. You actually have to figure out what you like with this toy, figure out what you don't like, experiment with it. You might need to fantasize as well, because part of it is our body and part of it is our minds, right? And so with something like, so Tara, like your example, somebody buys the Hitachi and they're like, whoa, that was way too much and I don't like vibrators. I might say like, did you ever try just like touching it just the tiniest bit to your vulva, or like the sides, like maybe like down by where your labia are more than up where your clitoris is, like, and just letting that sensation build? Or do you ever want to put a washcloth or underwear or your bedding between you and the vibrator, or your hand on top of your genitals and then the vibrator on top, right? To just like let that be a little less sensation and let there be a buildup. Because remember that oftentimes we start like we don't usually jump from 0 to 60. Sometimes people do, but a lot of times you don't. And so if you are at a 0 and you put a level 60 stimulation on you, that is sometimes jarring. Whereas if you start out with like, okay, I'm doing a little bit of this. Okay, now I'm a little bit more turned on. I'm doing a little bit more. Okay, now I'm really aroused and more sensation feels better. You do have to like work with yourself and follow yourself. So that's what I think about with vibrators and people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do encourage people. That's probably like my first preference, but I the other thing I was thinking about, and I do kind of warn people about the Hitachi magic wand, which is fun. I have a tattoo of a Hitachi magic wand. I have many pieces of art of the Hitachi. Well, because it is very emblematic, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, I would say some of the similar things, but I think there's such a wide range of toys that like if people feel comfortable, well, and we have some, I'm sure maybe you guys have some like in your offices and stuff, but we have some here. And then we also have like a feminist sex toy store, but like, or even I'll look online with people and then kind of talk through like different sensations. But I like the Lilo line of vibrators. And I like their wand because it does have a range of settings and it has pulses and stuff. And so if someone is going to use a vibrator, I will sort of ask them to pay attention to that and like building up the arousal. So I'll also have people like set a timer and be like, your goal is not to have an orgasm. Your goal is to become mindful of like, what are the different sensations? And I want you to come back and kind of try to describe them to me. You know, so if like people have that as like the task of like paying attention to like what it feels like versus like, how is this going to get me to my orgasm? I feel like sometimes that it's like the steps of masturbation too, you know, because I think it takes that pressure off of like, oh, I should die, you know, like be able to come. I guess I'm wondering for you all. Oh, what else? Oh, I was gonna say for people who might, I do a lot of workshops for older folks around sexuality and aging, and you know, people, all sorts of people might have like different like you might not have like the dexterity or hand flexibility or might get sore, things like that. There's like new vibrators that like there's like a starfish one that you kind of like place on, or ones that have like an adaptation so it doesn't tire your wrist or your hand and it can be easier. So like that can be a more accessible way. Um and then you know what it made me think of was asking people. I'd be curious, do you all ask people about like what their childhood masturbation ways of doing that for, or you know, like I think that is always so much good information too about like what are people's usual typical sort of pathway to like pleasure, and then if you want to expand out from there or sort of use that. But yeah, do you find that, because there's a lot of people that have a lot of hands off or like kind of secretive ways of having an orgasm?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I definitely so I do a fair amount of work with cis men around like sexual performance concerns, and like that's like a like looking back at like, so a lot of times you know, let's say someone has been masturbating quite a bit, but like, you know, they're wondering why maybe certain components of like sort of their sexual dynamic with a partner might be interfered with for a bit, you know, and then they're kind of like trying to translate certain things. So like, let's say somebody is like, basically masturbation patterns can impact dynamic patterns, right? So like, let's say somebody is edging while masturbating for like 5 hours, and that's maybe how they masturbate, but then they're like with a partner and they're like, why isn't it taking 12 minutes? well, you know, well, or
Ranger.
right, or like, you know, let's say somebody is masturbating more in like the prone position, right, where they're like on their stomach and there's like a lot of body weight and there's a lot of pressure, but then like, and they haven't maybe engaged with a partner before, and that sensation, to your point about all the sensations, feels very different, and so then they're curious like why they're not getting aroused or they're not orgasming in the same way. And so like I think that like looking at sort of and trying to help people also develop patience, which is like we can learn lots of different ways to masturbate. Like there's lots of different ways, especially if you pull pressure, I think to your point, Katie, off orgasm, right? Like if you try to make it more around like what do you notice and like building a greater like sensory vocabulary, I don't know, or sort of lexicon.
Yeah. Well, and I talk to people about like cum flexibility.
So good. I feel like I want to put a little R, right? Like, or TR, trademark.
Well, I mean, because just that way, like usually most people have like your kind of go-to method. This is actually why like this is like in the pandemic, but I think I had gotten like a little like lazy with my vibrator, like the Lilo wand. I was like, she's great. She's my friend. Like, fast and easy, you know? But then I was like, okay, wait a second. As a sex therapist, I take it really seriously that I should follow my own advice and I should try all the exercises that I prescribe to people. So I try to do all those things. But so like I was like, okay, I hid my vibrator from myself when I moved into a new place. But like it like kind of like took the option of like being like if I was like falling asleep and I just want to, you know, but then like I think because I think being able to like use your hand or just have multiple pathways to be able to have an orgasm to come, like having cum flexibility helps also with partner sex. So if you're practicing it with masturbation, then it just like makes it, you know, takes down some of the anxiety of like, oh, I know I can do these different, this is me getting a different position.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I will be like, I was like, when's the last time you masturbated on your knees? Never. Give it a shot, right? Like when's the last time you masturbated? If you only on your back, on your stomach, or sitting in a chair, or like to your point around like, there's no reason. It's just like, do you got the time and the will? You know, like, and I do think like setting to your point, like realistic expectations that like, you know, you might not immediately be orgasming in those positions, but it's still a worthwhile effort to try to like learn how to be more flexible around that. I also think it's like to your point, right? I think that it really helps with like flexibility during partner sex, but it also like it's just kind of fun to have options. Like
It's kind of fun to have.
Feel like in your body, you know, like because some of the things that you're saying, like being on your knees or being on your back or being like on your stomach or like, you know, like sitting up, like you're just oriented different. So like maybe your arousal will feel different. And so like, you know, just knowing what that feels like, that's more information for you.
This conversation is really making me think about how I think that a lot of the like mainstream messaging around sex and sexuality is shifting towards the better and is creating more space for people. But I think one message that I would like to hear more of is exactly what you two are saying of take the orgasm out of it for a while, take the quote unquote goals out of it for a while, and just give yourself permission to experience and play, and don't judge what's happening, but do notice what's happening and just see what kind of information that gives you and see if it's fun at all, or see if you get to know yourself better, because there's so much that we miss in sex if we're just always shooting for that orgasm or whatever outcome, whatever standard we're holding ourselves to. I want to be able to have sex for this long. I want my body part to do this specific thing, you know? And I think that just really wipes out the experience along the way. It's about the journey, guys. It's about the journey.
It is. You know, and it's sometimes the hardest sell, but I think it's the most important sell, right? Like in sex therapy. Yep. And I know we have to like wind down on time here because we've kept lovely Katie today. But I do think that like for me, that idea, like I talk to people a lot about whether it's during like solo sex or sex with a partner around like the idea of practice sessions where you're literally just practicing new skill sets. And like you literally try to frame it in your brain as like, this is practice. Like it's call it practice, tell yourself it's practice, tell each other if it's with someone else it is practice. And it's interesting how much that helps. Just like reframing it in a slightly different way around like this isn't like, sometimes I'll even tell people if they're having a really hard time, like, it's not sex, it's just practice. We're like literally even separating that for some people is important because to your point, like we've been so like sex and orgasm have been so inextricably linked in ways that like, I get it, but also is like maybe not always been the most helpful, especially when we're trying to learn new stuff. So, hey, Katie, we usually, when people join before we end, ask if they have anything to plug. Do you have anything you want to plug?
I'm thinking. What I was just thinking about when you were talking about is how I have begun saying when I give talks that I'm a queer sex enthusiast.
It's a good way.
I love that.
And partially being a queer sex enthusiast is speaking to all those things because I think one of the beautiful things about queer sex is like negotiation and like attending to each other's pleasure and like sort of maybe not being as focused on like orgasm, but like sort of negotiating pleasure with each other, like taking turns or like, sort of like I feel like there's creativity and flexibility that's like, built into queer sex that I think is cool. I guess maybe the thing I could plug is, I don't know if Laura, you do, but Tera and I both teach in the continuing and professional education sex therapy certificate program at the University of Minnesota.
I don't anymore. I used to. I don't anymore. Oh,
well, I do. That's okay. I'm teaching.
I'm at a different university now.
I would just say, like, I'm just really pro more people getting more training in like gender affirming care and sex therapy, and that only like makes your therapy practice better overall, and that there is a lot of importance of good training. So yeah, those certificate programs are like one option, but also there's like, you also, if you're interested in gender affirming care, I'm one of the trainers in the Global Education Initiative through the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. And anyone can sign up for like their series of like trainings and you can get certified as a gender specialist. So how's that? I plugged that.
Great programs. And Katie is like one of the best people to learn from around these topics. So if you're interested, take our classes.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for joining, Katie. We'll probably beg you to come back at another point.
You have to come back on.
You always have, and we also come up with so many good business ideas. So if
we can fund it, yeah.
Yeah.
Anything, Laura, that you have to plug today?
Just my normal stuff. You can find me at laurarademacher.com. I have classes online at classes.laurarademacher.com. And those are for, a lot of them are great for couples, but they're also great for solo people too. On demand, you can sit at home and learn about sex.
And you can find me at terajansen.com and also check out our other podcast, The University of Pleasure. Thank you. Goodbye, you two. Love you both.
Bye-bye.
Bye.